This woman's name is Haley. She's 26 years old. And right now, she's sitting in her small apartment, staring at her phone, wondering if grabbing a sandwich with her coworkers will trigger another interrogation from her husband. 2 years ago, she made a terrible mistake. She had an affair. She knows it was wrong. She's apologized countless times. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. When does punishment end? When does accountability turn into abuse? Because Haley isn't living in a marriage anymore. She's living in a surveillance state. And the warden, the man who promised to love her forever. I'm Emma, and this is Mrs. Emma, where we dive deep into the complicated, messy, and sometimes heartbreaking stories of real people navigating impossible situations. Today's story is about betrayal. Yes. But it's also about control, manipulation, and the fine line between healing and revenge. So settle in, because Haley's journey is going to take us to some dark places, and by the end you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about forgiveness. Let me take you back to where this all started. Haley and John, high school sweethearts. The kind of love story that makes people believe in soulmates. They were barely 18 when they got married, young and hopeful, convinced that their love could conquer anything life threw at them. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. But somewhere between the wedding vows and the birth of their 2 sons, something shifted. John, the charming boy who used to plan surprise dates and leave love notes in Haley's locker, transformed into someone she barely recognized. He threw himself into work, coming home exhausted every evening, barely able to string together a conversation. The romance that once defined their relationship evaporated like morning mist. Date nights became a luxury they couldn't afford, or so John claimed. Meanwhile, Haley was drowning in responsibilities, working full-time, managing the household, raising their boys, all while feeling increasingly invisible. She tried to communicate, she really did. She'd suggest they do something together, just the 2 of them, something to reignite that spark they once had. But John would brush her off, muttering something about saving money for the children's future, about being responsible adults now. And maybe that should have been enough for Haley. Maybe she should have been satisfied with stability and security. But she wasn't. She felt like she was disappearing, becoming nothing more than a fixture in her own home. Then Bryce walked into her life. Older, successful, attentive. Everything John had stopped being. It started innocently enough, harmless flirting at the office, compliments that made her feel seen again. Bryce noticed when she wore a new dress. He asked about her day and actually listened to her answers. He made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was even possible. And Haley? She fell for it. Hard. The affair lasted 8 months. 8 months of secret text messages, stolen moments, and a version of herself that Haley had thought was gone forever. With Bryce, she wasn't just a wife or a mother or an employee. She was a woman who was desired, appreciated, valued. He brought her coffee in the morning. He sent sweet messages throughout the day. He wanted to spend time with her, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. Now, before you judge her too harshly, and believe me, Haley judges herself plenty, let me be clear. She knows what she did was wrong. There's no justification for betrayal, no excuse that makes infidelity okay. But understanding why someone does something doesn't mean excusing it. It means recognizing that human beings are complicated, that marriages can become toxic long before anyone steps outside them, and that sometimes people make devastating choices when they feel like they're suffocating. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and Haley's secret exploded in the worst possible way. One evening, she meant to send a text to Bryce. Something affectionate, something intimate. But her fingers betrayed her. She sent it to John instead. Can you imagine that moment? The split second of horror when you realize what you've done? When you know that the life you've been living is about to implode? John didn't confront her immediately. No, he went into detective mode. He started following her, collecting evidence like he was building a case for trial. Screenshots of messages, photographs of her and Bryce together, timelines documenting every suspicious moment. And when he finally confronted her, he had everything laid out like a prosecutor presenting to a jury. The confrontation was brutal. John cried. He begged. He asked her how she could do this to him, to their family, to their boys. And Haley, looking at her husband's devastated face, realized the magnitude of what she'd destroyed. She apologized. She promised to end things with Bryce. She swore she would do whatever it took to rebuild their marriage, and she meant it. In that moment, she genuinely meant it. But then came the rules. Oh, the rules. John presented them like terms of a legal contract, conditions for her continued presence in their home. First, she had to write a detailed confession letter, describing everything that had happened with Bryce. Every conversation, every meeting, every intimate moment. It was humiliating, but she did it. Then John demanded she give a copy of that letter to Bryce's wife. He wanted everyone to know what she'd done, wanted to burn down Bryce's life the way his own had been burned down. Haley had to quit her job. Immediately. No discussion, no negotiation. John insisted she couldn't be trusted in an environment where Bryce was present. And just like that, her financial independence vanished. She became completely dependent on John, trapped in a way she hadn't anticipated. But it didn't stop there. John installed tracking apps on her phone. He monitored the GPS in her car. He demanded all her passwords, social media accounts, email, everything. Privacy became a concept from her past life. And the check-ins. Every 30 minutes when she was out of the house, she had to call or text John, reporting her location, what she was doing, who she was with. Haley told herself this was temporary, that once John felt secure again, once he saw she was committed to their marriage, things would go back to normal. But months passed, and the surveillance only intensified. One of John's conditions cut deepest of all. Haley had to end her friendship with Jenna, her best friend since college. Why? Because Jenna had known about the affair and hadn't told John. In his mind, that made Jenna complicit, a co-conspirator in Haley's betrayal. Never mind that best friends keep confidences. Never mind that loyalty to a friend isn't the same as betrayal of a spouse. John saw Jenna as an enemy, and he demanded she be eliminated from Haley's life. So Haley lost her best friend. She lost her co-workers, the people she'd spent years building relationships with. She lost her sense of independence, her privacy, her autonomy. Slowly but surely, John stripped away every connection she had to the outside world until she was completely isolated, completely dependent on him. And through it all, John positioned himself as the victim. The long-suffering husband who was graciously giving his cheating wife a second chance. He wasn't controlling her. He was rebuilding trust. He wasn't punishing her. He was establishing accountability. At least that's what he told her. That's what he told everyone. But Haley started to notice something troubling. Sometimes when John looked at her, there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite pain. It was almost like satisfaction. Like he was enjoying this new dynamic where he held all the power and she had none. 2 years. 2 full years of living under John's microscope. 2 years of checking in every 30 minutes. Of having every friendship scrutinized. Of justifying every minute she spent outside the house. And Haley was starting to crack. She'd followed every rule. She'd apologized 1,000 times. She'd sacrificed her job, her friends, her independence. And still, John's trust hadn't returned. If anything, he seemed more suspicious, more controlling than ever. Haley found a new job, something part-time that John approved of. And at this job, she met a group of women who invited her to join them for lunch. Just lunch. Sandwiches and gossip and normal workplace conversation. But when Haley mentioned it to John, his entire demeanor changed. Who would be there? Where were they going? How long would it take? Why did she need to go anyway? It was like asking permission to commit a crime instead of just having a meal with colleagues. Haley decided to go anyway. And for 1 hour, sitting in that restaurant with women who laughed freely and talked about their lives without fear, she remembered what it felt like to be normal. To be herself. Not John's rehabilitation project. But of course John tracked her location. And of course, lunch ran 20 minutes longer than she'd estimated. And of course, when she got home, there was an interrogation waiting for her. Why was she late? Who exactly had she been with? Had there been any men there? Why hadn't she checked in? The paranoia was exhausting. Every conversation became a trap. Every explanation led to more questions. Haley found herself lying about small things just to avoid the drama. Stopped for coffee? Tell John there was traffic. Talk to a male coworker about a project? Leave that detail out when describing her day. And that's when Haley realized something chilling. John's extreme reaction to her affair had actually made her a better liar, because telling the truth was never good enough anyway. Then came Jenna's bachelorette party. Jenna, the best friend Haley had been forced to cut out of her life, was getting married. And she wanted Haley there, in Miami, for 3 days of celebration. When Haley told John about the invitation, his response was immediate and absolute. No, absolutely not. Jenna was a bad influence. Miami was too far away. 3 days was too long. The answer was no. But something in Haley snapped. This was her best friend's once-in-a-lifetime event. She'd already lost so much. She'd already sacrificed so much. And she was tired. So incredibly tired of being punished for a mistake she'd made 2 years ago. So Haley did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She told John she was going to Miami whether he liked it or not. She wasn't asking for permission. She was informing him of her decision. You should have seen his face. For the first time in 2 years, Haley wasn't the compliant, apologetic wife trying to earn back his trust. She was standing her ground, and it felt incredible. John threatened divorce. But Haley called his bluff. She told him that if he wanted to destroy their family over a 3-day trip to celebrate her best friend, then maybe their marriage wasn't as strong as he claimed. And for once, John didn't have a comeback. Miami was everything Haley needed. 3 days of freedom, of laughing with friends, of existing without someone analyzing her every move. She barely thought about John, except when he kept calling and texting, demanding updates, wanting to know where she was and what she was doing. Haley started ignoring his messages, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was exhausted from reporting her every breath to him. And John? He completely spiraled. He called her hotel room at 2 a.m, drunk and crying, accusing her of cheating with random men in Miami. When Haley told him he was being ridiculous and hung up on him, he left 15 voicemails, ranging from angry to pathetic to threatening. When Haley returned home, John was waiting with a dramatic confrontation planned. He'd convinced himself she'd used Miami as an excuse to cheat again. Nothing Haley said could persuade him otherwise. He demanded to see her phone, to go through all her photos. He wanted proof she hadn't been with anyone else. Haley refused. And that refusal felt like power. The fighting after Miami was worse than anything they'd experienced during the original affair. John was furious that Haley had defied him, furious that she'd ignored his calls, furious that she'd had fun without feeling guilty, but mostly he was furious that his control over her was slipping. Haley started pushing back more. When John demanded to know why she was 10 minutes late, she'd tell him it was none of his business. When he wanted to check her phone, she'd refuse. When he started his lectures about trust and accountability, she'd walk away. The final straw came when John tried to make Haley quit her new job because she'd been too friendly with a male coworker at a work event. This man was married with children. They'd talked about a project for maybe 10 minutes. But John had convinced himself this was the beginning of another affair. Haley looked at her husband and realized that no amount of good behavior would ever be enough. He would always find something to be suspicious about, because living in fear and paranoia had become his comfort zone. It gave him an excuse to control every aspect of her life while playing the victim. She told John she was done. She'd rather be divorced than spend another day in his emotional prison. And this time, when John threatened divorce, Haley didn't back down. She told him to go ahead and file the papers. John filed for divorce 3 months after Miami, and the proceedings were vicious. His lawyer painted Haley as an unfit mother, a serial cheater who couldn't be trusted. They used everything against her, the affair, her defiant behavior after Miami, her pattern of deception, even her job changes as evidence of instability. Meanwhile, John got to play the long-suffering husband who'd tried everything to save their marriage. The custody arrangement devastated Haley. Despite being the primary caregiver for years, she only got the boys every other weekend and 1 evening a week. The judge ordered her to pay John spousal support because she'd quit her original job as part of his rehabilitation program and now had a gap in employment. So Haley ended up in a cramped apartment, working overtime to afford rent while paying her ex-husband money every month. She sees her children every other weekend. And John? He's already moved on, dating someone new, posting pictures on social media about his healthy relationship and new beginning. Now, here's where I want you to really think about this story. Because it's easy to say Haley deserved everything that happened to her. She cheated. She broke her vows. She shattered her husband's trust. And those things are absolutely true. But here's the question that haunts me. At what point does accountability become abuse? At what point does reconciliation become control? When does a wounded spouse stop healing and start enjoying the power that comes from being the victim? I'm not saying Haley was blameless, but I am saying that John's response to her affair was just as damaging to their marriage as the affair itself. You cannot rebuild trust through surveillance and isolation. You cannot heal a relationship by turning it into a prison. And maybe, just maybe, both of them failed. Haley failed by seeking happiness outside her marriage instead of confronting the problems within it. And John failed by choosing revenge disguised as reconciliation. This story doesn't have a happy ending. Haley is living in a small apartment, missing her children, and trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of her mistakes. John has moved on, convinced he was the only victim in their story. And two young boys are learning what happens when love turns toxic. So what do we take from this? Maybe that betrayal is never simple. That punishment has limits. That control masquerading as care is still abuse. And that sometimes the person who hurt you and the person who helps you heal cannot be the same. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it challenged your perspective, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Mrs. Emma because every week, I bring you stories that dive deep into the complexity of human relationships, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Was Haley the villain in this story? Was John? Or were they both just broken people who couldn't find their way back to each other? I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that every story has multiple sides, and the truth is usually somewhere in the messy middle.